Welcome to this online forum or webinar entitled Boosting the Philippine Economy, Moving Fast Forward and Up. This is a webinar on improving the economy battered by COVID-19 through amending the economic provisions of the 1987 Constitution. This event is a presentation of Tanggulang Demokrasya or Tandem in partnership with Publicus Asia. My name is Arnel Endrinal and I am your host and moderator this afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining this event. The question we have to answer is, should we or should we not amend the economic provisions of the 1987 Constitution? And if we should, what amendments are proposed and are those worth our consideration? We may not be able to arrive at the answer this afternoon, but we have two very able speakers whom I will introduce a bit later and who would present the suggestions for or perhaps against amending the Constitution. And so that we may be able to properly digest the presentations, we also have a distinguished panel of directors, the members of which I will be introducing now. First on our list is Mr. George Barcelon. Mr. George Barcelon is the Chairman Emeritus of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, representing the private sector in the Industry Development Council and National Competitive Council. He also served as one of the three Philippine representatives to the ASEAN Business Advisory Council or ASEAN BAC. Welcome to the event, Mr. George Barcelon.
Good afternoon, my pleasure to be here.
Next, we have Dr. Martin Henkelman. Dr. Martin Henkelman is an attorney and earned his doctorate in law from Eberhard Karl University Law School in Germany. Dr. Martin Henkelman is currently the Executive Director of the German-Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Prior to that, he also served as the Chief Executive Officer of the German-Tunisian Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Dr. Martin Henkelman also held various positions in the German Insurance Association as Head of International Affairs, Head of Policy Coordination Unit, and Deputy Head of the European Office. Welcome to the event, Mr. Martin or Dr. Martin Henkelman. How are you, sir?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course, last but not least, we have Dr. Bernardo Villegas. Dr. Bernardo Malvar Villegas is a professor at the University of Asia and the Pacific, UANP, Research Director of the Center for Research and Communication, Manila, and visiting professor of IESE Business School in Barcelona. He holds a PhD in economics from Harvard University and is a certified public accountant, having been one of the CPA board top-notchers in 1958. He obtained bachelor's degrees in commerce and the humanities, both summa cum laude, from the De La Salle University. He was a member of the Constitutional Commission that drafted the Philippine Constitution under the government of former President Corazon Aquino. Welcome to the event, Dr. Bernie Villegas.
I look forward to this very interesting conversation on how to get the Philippine economy to move fast forward, among other ways by looking at the Philippine Constitution.
So now I would like to go ahead and introduce our speakers. Dindo Donato is the General Counsel of Tanggulang Demokrasya, or Tandem for short. It's a people's organization advocating systems change. He is a partner at the Donato and Zarate law firm where he handles mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures, cross-border investments, due diligence, service and employment contracts, and so on. Attorney Donato's engagement with system change has been influenced by his civic work extending legal assistance to indigenous peoples, landless farmers, subsistence fisher folk, and rural workers. He obtained his Bachelor's of Laws from the Ateneo de Manila University in 1988 and his Master's of Laws on Banking, Corporate, and Finance Law from Fordham University in New York in 1995. He was admitted to the bar in 1989. Good afternoon, Attorney Dindo.
Good afternoon, sir.
How are you?
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining.
Now, I would like to introduce our second speaker. Our second speaker is no other than Mr. Sunny Africa, the Executive Director of Ibon Foundation, an independent non-government organization providing research, information, and education services to people's movements in the Philippines and abroad since 1978. He's also a board member of the alternative media outfit Alter Media and the Civil Society Network Council for People's Development and Governance, or CPDG. He's a fellow of the Center for People's Empowerment in Governments, CENPEG, and the Center for Anti-Imperialist Studies, CAIS, and an editor of the online news magazine, Bulaklak. He previously worked as a staff in the National Economic and Development Authority, NEDA, evaluator of NGOs with Management Systems Advancement, Inc., MASAI, legislative officer in Congress, and as a rural community organizer. He has been an active educator to the People's Organization as well as a resource person for schools, NGOs, government, and media since the 1990s. His writings on socio-economic and political issues have been published by Ibon, international NGOs, UNICEF, and the National Anti-Poverty Commission, NIPC. He obtained his master's degree in development studies and bachelor's degree in philosophy and economics with upper second-class honors from the London School of Economics and Political Science, or LSE. Good afternoon, Director Africa.
Magandang hapon sa lahat.
So are we ready with our presentations? So, Attorney, may I turn the floor over to you now? It's your turn.
Thank you. Thank you, Arnel, for the kind introduction. So let's proceed. Before I go into the measures that we propose, I would like to first give a brief background. Some background. Out of 103 million population, the challenge is we have 17.6 in poverty, which means they cannot send their children to school. 5.5 in extreme poverty, they have no money to buy food. Out of the 46 million labor, about 10% are jobless. That's double because of COVID-19. And due to lack of jobs, we have 2.2 million OFWs. Those are the documented. If you include undocumented, it's probably double. Total Filipinos overseas, around 10 million, including migrants, basically to seek better life. Now, the OFW, that's the biggest dollar earner. Second is BPO. They are mostly foreign owned. Now we go to the public utilities. They are governed by 60-40 rule. They call it Filipino First policy. So this is the effect of the Filipino First policy. You have the slowest internet in ASEAN, costliest also. You have the second highest power in Asia. You have water shortage in Metro Manila. Domestic shipping has the highest casualty rate, death rate in East Asia, also among the costliest in ASEAN. And if you look into the construction industry, 73%, this is an old survey, 73% are with labor violations and 56% with safety violations. Now, what's our political situation? We have a presidential system here. One person controls the entire branch, executive branch. He also appoints the judges. He cannot be removed except according to the Constitution by impeachment. In practice, it has not happened. You only remove the president by people's power. At the local branch, it's the same. One person controls everything. And the LGUs, basically a republic within a republic, all of them are autonomous even if they have overlapping jurisdictions. Now, how about the elections? We follow in the Philippines voting at large instead of voting by district. That's for president, vice president, senator, governor, and mayor. Okay? So, in effect, that's actually a very expensive campaign. I will now go into the proposals we have. We have basically two. How to address this poverty, etc. issue. One, liberalize the investment framework. Two, downsize, right-size the government, especially the elective part of government. What do we get out of liberalizing? These are the the intended results. We create jobs, we reduce consumer prices, we generate taxes, and what we want to do is we reform now. Anyway, Congress is there, they are already established, they can always put in the limitations later. They have the oversight function. Supply and demand. Usually in the last webinar I attended, it's still there again, labor against management, blah, 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 talking about 13th month pay, talking about termination. At the end of the day, the price of labor, the price of goods and services, the price of public utilities, that's based on supply and demand. It's not based on wage order. It's not based on collective bargaining. It's based on supply and demand. That's the bottom line. So how do we address this problem? There's one resource that we have not tapped fully. What is that? FDI, foreign direct investments. Because we have like so many laws, in fact, even in the Constitution itself, which restricts their entry. Okay? For me, the Filipino First policy is a false economic policy. Ulitin ko lang, false economic policy. It does not really represent the interests of the 100 million consumers or the 45 million workers. To me, it's anti-consumer and anti-labor. Why? It restricts the demand for labor services, and two, it restricts the supply of consumer goods. They say that this policy is supposed to give benefits to the shareholders, and then the benefits will trickle down. That's the problem there. I think that is where the false assumption lies. Let's look at it in terms of enterprise shareholders, enterprise customers, and enterprise workers. If you notice, I'm sure the labor leaders here now and the business leaders, they're always opposed. Whether or not you give them a law that gives them a monopoly or a oligopoly, they will still be opposed. Owners will always ask for higher prices to increase the dividends, and customers will always want for lower prices. Same thing with labor. That's why you always have a deadlock. Now, because of this COVID-19, the bargaining now is really, really, really heavy because of the economy. Let's look at it in another way. For the youth, I was once upon a time there. They would think that the most important labor law is the minimum wage. For the labor sector, they have another view. They say that the most important is the right to organize because they use that for bargaining. But for me, I've been into labor practice, now I've been into corporate practice. After synthesizing everything, there's one thing we missed. The most important labor right is the right to work, the right to have a job. Without a job, the entire labor code is useless. What you will apply is the criminal code because people will resort to crime. Now, what is the challenge that we face? We made our own computation. This is 2016 data. Cost for one employee for 1 year is 100,000. That's the lowest. You multiply that by 4.58 million unemployed, that's 458 billion in 1 year. At minimum wage, that's what we need. Where will you get that money? Anyway, the restriction against foreign investments, it's very tight. No? It's not just a civil law violation, they actually made it a criminal offense. Here, this is not old saying, I'd rather have I hope people will not take this seriously. I will understand if they said this like in 1935 because they were against the foreign colonizer. But the colonizer has long gone, okay? Now we are facing a different kind of problem, which is poverty. So let's not take this saying too seriously, okay? Here's another one, sounds the same. So do we have detailed proposals? Yes, we do, for the Constitution and for the law itself. The law itself, it includes, if I remember correctly, 61 laws to be amended. That's in addition to the Constitution, okay? That's how strict we are, okay? So the drafts, they are in the Tandem Facebook page. There's a People's Draft page. our law firm page, our law firm website, it's all there. There are those who say that if you allow the entry of foreign investors, you might actually compromise security. That is correct. That is why in the bill that we prepared, we followed the model of the US CFIUS, Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States. It is empowered to investigate any and all foreign investments just in case they prejudice national security. And if they're already there, they are empowered to force divestment. This is the way to guard against abuse. Right-sized government. Basically, we're trying to save money so that the money spent for salaries of officials will be spent for projects instead. So in sum, it's like a merger of executive and legislative branches, and the city and municipality as the basic LGU. What does this mean? This is actually parliament at the national level and council type LGU at the local level. City and municipality as basic LGU, that's to avoid the territorial overlap. So how do we implement that? Two ways: less officials and less elections. In a parliament, basically the executives also come from the body. Same thing with the council type of LGU. Just in case you have regions who want to go for autonomy, it's fine. But we will not create another layer of government officialdom at that level, like 18 congresses. No, nothing like that. If they want autonomy, fine. All the mayors and all the congressmen will be the ex officio members. That's it. Less elections. We know that subdivisions, they have homeowners association, condominium corporations, they have associations, they have the communities, they already have their own president there. So we're thinking, why don't we just get them appointed? Let them nominate 3 for every vacancy. The mayors will appoint. Less elections. Here, congressmen, councilors, etc., 5-year term. We heard this so many times. 3 years is too short. First year is to learn. Last year is to campaign. You only have 1 year to work. So previously it was 6 years. They changed it into 3. Compromise, it's 5. But we have a provision for recall. Just in case you have a local official or a congressman who doesn't do his work, then you recall. Again, there are those who would like some form of decentralization. What we suggest is we follow the model of SBMA. Yeah? One-stop shop. Everything is there. You have a board. The national government is represented there, and the local officials are also represented there. And the projects, it's approved there by people who hold office there. You don't have to go to Manila. You're already there. The only difference is that here, the regional office is very big, like for the entire region. SBMA is like small economic zone only, small area. Again, we have detailed proposals, constitution, and also the local government code. You can check in the website and in the Facebook page. What happens if we implement the people's draft? This computation made by Mr. Rodolfo Vicera, former Director General of the Congressional Planning and Budget Department. He estimated under the people's draft, you will save like 13.5 billion a year. Okay? Because you have less elections and you have less officials. That's it. 13.5 a year. If you follow the CONCOM draft, that's an additional cost of 40 billion a year. Sorry, but that's the computation. There are those, again, who say that regardless of the system, nothing will change, people will be corrupt, blah, blah, blah. We have an answer to that. Corruption is a problem by itself. At the same time that a system is a problem by itself. We have to address both of them. Even if everybody is honest, but you have a law which restricts the entry of investments, you will still have a shortage of investors, shortage of capital, shortage of supply. shortage of demand for labor, even if everybody is honest. That's what we are saying. Change the system and discipline the people who run it at the same time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Attorney Dindo Donato. The one thing that really got me excited about your presentation is when you mentioned that when we use your draft, we would actually have like what 13 what did you say 13.5 billion of savings.
Yes, sir, because we will actually reduce the number of officials. We will not create a regional congress, and we will just use the existing officers already there.
But who made that?
That's not our computation, sir. That's somebody from the Congress.
All right. You mentioned also that there are 61 laws to be amended. What sort are those laws?
Everything, sir. I don't have it with me now. From usually the business side, even in banking, even the professional side. That's apart from the industries in the Constitution.
All right. Those are separate industries, different industries.
If I may refer the audience, in our website, also Facebook page, there's a Senate bill there. There's a draft. The details are there.
All right. You mentioned earlier also regarding the CFIUS, regarding guarding against abuse. You said this comes from the US. This is an American idea.
That's US practice, sir. It originated as an executive order. Later, they made it into a law.
Really?
In other words, it's not a blank. They do not have a blanket prohibition against investors. They let them come, and then if there's a problem, you investigate. If there's really a problem, you take them out. That's what they did.
But I suppose there are other countries also that are having.
I'm not sure of the other countries, but I'm aware of one incident. They did that to Smartmatic in the US.
Oh, really?
They bought Sequoia.
Okay.
After a while, they were investigated. And even before the investigation was terminated, Smartmatic withdrew. No explanation because the proceeding is confidential because it involves national security.
Okay.
Something like that, sir.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Attorney Dindo, for your presentation. Now it is time for us to ponder perhaps another suggestion.
Thank you.
This time coming from Director Sunny Africa. Director Sunny, are you ready? Yeah, we have your presentation now. May I turn the floor over to you now?
Thank you. Is the presentation showing?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. I'm going to try to give a not the usual perspective. It's such a big question, how to boost the Philippine economy. I think one important role of civil society is we need to give a alternative perspective to not necessarily give all the answers, but at least give a perspective on which to find solutions. So I'm going to try and push a little bit at the edges of the policy envelope to expand our options. Okay. I think one very useful thing about the onset of the pandemic is that it's such an unprecedented global shock. It got people to rethink their daily lives, their habits, their routines. I think it's also actually a good chance to rethink a lot of the views we've thought about in terms of Philippine economic development, and I think especially look forward to more progressive, possibly more radical shifts in Philippine economic policy making. One thing the pandemic has shown, actually, I think, is it's revealed a lot of our social economic vulnerabilities, not just in terms of our agriculture and industry, but also in terms of our social protection. But the thing is, I think it's so important to frame things, to see things in the correct way. We've heard a lot about the economic managers saying that we were so strong coming to the pandemic, so their attitude really basically is, let's get over this hump, let's go back to the way things were before, then we're fine. We kind of don't agree so much on that, and I think we have to start by acknowledging some genuine pre-existing conditions. The Philippines really was very weak coming to the pandemic. So when we're talking about boosting the pandemic post-COVID, I think it's also about boosting the kind of economy we had before. I apologize. There are a few charts and tables here, but I think they're useful to summarize the situation. Um, the gross domestic product is usually presented as agriculture, industry, and services. So we sort of rearranged those things and put them in terms of production, meaning combining manufacturing, agriculture, construction, mining, and quarrying, put it astride services, and then separating public utilities. I think this chart is quite useful because it shows how bad things have gotten with the Philippine economy since the late 1970s. When we started this hope that globalization, trade and investment liberalization, that really started in the late 1970s with the first World Bank Structural Adjustment Loan. What has happened to the Philippine economy since then? I think it's unambiguous, but however we look at it, we are seeing relative, and in some cases, in terms of industry, absolute terms, we are seeing actually worsening agricultural backwardness and industrial decline since the 1980s. We have an economy right now driven really by trade and consumption, not so much by production. And I think that fact really explains a lot about where we are right now. Since the 90s, we've had such rapid growth, increasingly rapid growth, but I think it's worth stressing. There has not been commensurate employment growth. If anything, it's been slowing. And the kind of jobs we had, 72% are in the informal sector. So I think that indicates coming into the pandemic after 4 decades of globalization, there's really a deep structural problem. So I mean, I've shared the slides, but the numbers are there for those fast enough to see what the numbers are. But I think broad strokes, definitely increasingly rapid growth since the 1990s. Employment growth has been slowing, and employment generation in absolute terms has actually also been slowing. And I think it's very striking. The Duterte administration, not just it's its fault, but the Duterte administration is actually seeing the worst annual job generation in the post-Marcos era. Which also explains why even before COVID, there actually were unmute there. Even before COVID, we had the record numbers of unemployed. Unemployment statistics, I think, have to be corrected because since 2005, the government changed the definition. So what we've done in EBON, we reverted to the old definition, which I think is important for policymaking purposes. You want to see trends over the long term, not comparing apples and oranges. So the blue bars on the left, these are official unemployment figures. The orange bits are, again, using PSA data, but reverting to the old definition. We are seeing basically record numbers of unemployed coming into the pandemic and unemployment rates actually averaging over 10% since the 1980s. So a lot of the falling unemployment averages being reported right now are a bit illusory. And also another sign of our structural problems, even before the pandemic, despite economic collapse in Philippine history. Even the government's minus 5.5% growth was lower than the IMF's projected 8.3%. So we'll see how that goes. I think there's a huge range of estimates there, but I think by any standard, we are definitely seeing the worst economic collapse in Philippine history. Now, the economy will rebound, and I think that's one dangerous thing. We will definitely see better growth figures, especially next year. And unfortunately, if that's used as an excuse to say that, okay, things are fine now, we're recovering, we think that's going to be a bit of a problem. We have two basic things to sort out. First, we have to revive the economy from the collapse because of the pandemic. But I think also much more importantly, we have to reform the economy. We don't want to return to the same kind of underdeveloped, weekly job generating, poverty-ridden, huge inequality and carbon-intensive economy of before. So we will rebound, that's definite, but the rebound isn't recovery. So I think two things that flags is while we're not recovering, the burden of crisis is borne by poor and low-income Filipinos in terms of joblessness, as mentioned by Attorney Dindo, low incomes, irregular incomes, expensive healthcare, and all of that. So we have to look at things in a two-step approach. We have to recover. We have to recover from the lockdowns, get the economy started again. But because of the devastation sought by that, when we're reforming it, we also have to reform it to a better economy than we had before the pandemic struck. Unfortunately, we now have actually the weakest response among the major ASEAN economies. We did some number crunching on data in September from the ADB policy tracker. The Philippine response package is the smallest in terms of GDP among the major ASEAN economies. And we are the second worst in the GDP growth as reported. This just highlights how much more can be done. We have the weakest response among the major ASEAN economies, but also, which is I think a bit disturbing, we actually have an even weaker response than other countries reported as financially weaker or less creditworthy. The chart on the right is actually lifted from The Economist. The Department of Finance loved this chart because apparently they claim it shows how strong the Philippine economy was coming to the pandemic. These are The Economist on 6 or 7 measures of financial strength. Philippines very actually high up. The circle, the countries with the red circles, these are the other ASEAN economies, basically less financially strong by the indicators mentioned. So just to highlight, we actually have some room to maneuver. If other countries with, assessed less financially strong economies have bigger responses, that actually shows how much sort of wiggle room we have to increase our fiscal response. Unfortunately, that obsession with creditworthiness, we think is really working against us. If you look at the proposed 2021 budget, there's only a 9.9% increase in the 2021 budget. This is much lower than the historical average of an 11.1% increase. And it's actually even smaller than the 2020 increase in the budget. So basically, I think it comes from that basic assumption of the economic managers who were strong coming in. So since we're strong coming in, there's no need to actually worry about a strong fiscal response. And things get worse actually in the 2022 projections. Of course, this can change, but as projected by the BBCC, the budget increase in 2022 is going to be even smaller. And I don't recall the exact figures, but I'm pretty sure they're the smallest budget increase in at least 12 or 13 years. So we're not seeing any stimulus there, and I think that will get in the way of a fast recovery. Our basic proposal is that we need a response commensurate to the ongoing human suffering, the joblessness, the low incomes felt by so many Filipinos. And also, I think, again, to get a sense of the magnitude, we're seeing about a 2 trillion peso loss in actual and potential GDP. Not just in terms of 2 trillion less than last year, but 2 trillion less than if we had achieved the projected growth rates for 2020. I was in a forum with Representative Kimbo last week, and she said that it might actually be as much as 2.5 trillion. So again, these are rough estimates. Now, the table just shows the range of proposals at hand. The Bayanihan 2 is worth 166 billion pesos. The Arise bill of Rep. Kimbo, again from May, she said she wants to revise that. It's worth 1.3 trillion. The Makabayan block has a shield program worth 1.6 trillion, which is a bit more than a proposal by Ibon of 1.5 trillion. It's listed by various areas of intervention, but I think the bottom line is trying to stress the government can do so much more than Bayanihan 2, and also so much more than the proposed 2021 budget. And the question is always asked where to get the funds for this kind of response. Well, we think it's worthwhile to reconsider a lot of the infrastructure projects. It's an infrastructure project that is very reliant on imported materials, equipment, labor, which is the worst possible thing. That's a huge leakage for stimulus spending. So we think this kind of bigger stimulus package actually can be had by a combination of realigning from current spending, revenues from higher wealth and income taxes, also to some degree monetizing the deficit. And we do agree, if loans are needed, then loans can be taken out. In terms of broad strokes, there was a, there's so many things to be done, but I think that the frame really is whatever COVID response, should it be just to recover, return to the old way, but start using the government to shape an economy that really benefits everyone, meaning tackling social problems, environmental problems, and laying the basis for long-term equitable, sustainable development. The 1, 2, 3, 4 just highlights major areas of intervention, but one thing I really want to highlight is the point about MSE support and agri-fishery support. The collapse in our production sectors in the very, very first chart I showed, I think that underlies why we're not generating enough jobs and why we have so many overseas Filipinos, as mentioned by Attorney Dindo. So I think much more attention has to be given to that. At the same time, we shouldn't underestimate the importance of cash subsidies, not just to improve household welfare, but also as an aggregate stimulus aggregate demand in the economy. A lot of the times, MSMEs are also hesitant to take out loans because they see how poor consumption spending is right now. Now, one major point we'd like to raise in terms of how do we reform the economy, we really have to aim for Filipino industrial development. We have to fix this huge over-reliance on services in the economy and overseas Filipinos over agriculture and industry. This table shows the columns are the various economic sectors, agriculture, manufacturing on the left, over the services on the right. The rows are our biggest conglomerates, which is Filipinos. Again, magnitudes aren't here, but just to get a sense, a lot of our biggest corporations, biggest business, I'll ask for an extension of a minute or so, if I can. A lot of our big business actually focused on the services sectors. So we think, a lot more ambition and aggressiveness in terms of Philippine industrial policy. It has to be much more deliberate and much more explicit. And our industrial policy should go beyond being a mere location for foreign manufacturers. Quite important for us, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in 2012, they had a 50-year survey of economic development policies around the world, and they were very clear. The investment drive by national elites, by business elites, was a defining feature of development and developing domestic industrial bases. And late industrializers like South Korea and Taiwan, that was a very strong experience. Of course, since the 2012 survey of that, things have changed in the global economy, much more interlinked, we have the global value chains. But I think it doesn't detract from the reality that we do need state intervention and we do need to give domestic big business a key role in structural change. Big business will respond to incentives as well as to disincentives. I'm about to wrap up. One important context where we have to rethink our overly free market thrust, I think, is the reality. We're in a world of growing protectionism. It's not something we can wish away. The chart on the left, actually all these charts come from Global Trade Alert. The chart on the left lists government intervention since the typo there, since 2009, since the global financial crisis. The red bits are discriminatory, meaning protectionist policies. The green bits are liberalization. So just to show in a broad strokes, a big response by many governments around the world because of the crisis has been increasing protection. And to get a snapshot, the charts on the right, these are the G20 trade measures with each other. Basically, green is more open, red is more closed. I think it's quite clear between 2009 and 2020. Again, not necessarily because they're not reading their textbooks, but it might be for political reasons. It might be because you have Trump. But basically, even among the G20 countries, there's a lot more protectionism happening. So I think just put that there. When we make our economic policy, I think it's worthwhile to see, so what are global economic trends right now? I think the reality is we do have growing protectionism. I don't know if things will change with Biden or how much things will change, but basically these are G20 countries with growing protectionism worldwide. And to wrap up, there's a lot of question about the resources. I think we have to rethink our tax policies to be more progressive, meaning relying on higher direct taxes and relying less on consumption taxes. Our quick estimates for possible revenue generation from a higher income tax on the richest 2.5% of families that could generate potentially 127 billion. The chart on the left shows average monthly family income, and you see the huge leap, especially among the richest Filipinos. I think that's an opportunity there to raise revenues for Philippine economic development. One thing we believe should be considered much more is a wealth tax on the super rich. The circles on the bottom are to scale, we hope, the estimated wealth of Filipinos. Basically have a concentration of 4.1 trillion in wealth. Of course, their stock prices, so they're down a little bit now, of the 50 richest Filipinos. But we did some rough computations, some kind of wealth tax on the super rich. It's not oppressive. A 1% tax on wealth above 1 billion, 2% above 2 billion, and 3% above 3 billion could generate, theoretically, as much as 237 billion pesos just from the 50 richest Filipinos. Again, these more for illustrative purposes. I know it's going to be quite difficult to implement, how to estimate and all of that, but it's just to give an indication of where there is wealth to be had from the Philippines. Also want to highlight these 50 richest, the 4.1 trillion, there's actually more wealth than the poorest 60 or 70 million Filipinos combined. So there's an accumulation of wealth there that can be redistributed to economic purposes. Last point, also as a counterpoint to the CREATE law proposed to economic managers, it is possible to support MSMEs through modified CREATE with a two-tier system. Higher tax on large corporations, smaller tax on MSMEs. I think in ASEAN, I'm not sure, you can confirm, but last we checked, Brunei, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Thailand at least had two-tiered CIT schemes for them. Last point, I know it's so hard, it's so difficult, especially after Attorney Dindo's presentation. It's so hard to trust government, but I think there are economic policy measures that need to be taken. And of course, a core question is how do we build a government we can trust for the kind of government that the economy needs? I think we have to overcome our path dependence. If we get stuck with the kind of government we have, I think no matter what aspirations we have for economic development actually won't be happening.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sunny Africa. I would like to ask some questions. I think Attorney Dindo and yourself agree on one thing, that we all need job creation in the Philippines. Correct? Am I correct in saying that?
I think our OFWs are crazy. It doesn't make sense to have 10 to 12 million overseas Filipinos and at least 2.5 to 3 million overseas workers. There's something wrong with our job creation if we have to rely so much on overseas Filipino remittances.
Right. But I cannot equate the fact when you suggest we tax more on the rich, but we're supposed to encourage them to develop more businesses, right? Wouldn't that discourage them in putting more money and create more jobs?
I'm trying to think, if you have 4.1 trillion pesos and you tax about 237 billion from that, it's 3% more. It's about 5 to 6% of your wealth. I can't imagine that kind of marginal tax having a big effect on the rich investing. And I think that's where we want to sort of raise the question. Again, we can't do the protectionism of the 1950s and 1960s with the expansion of global value chains. But I think that's what the government has to start thinking. What can we do to incentivize Filipino industrial development? And the chart I showed where there's so much wealth concentrated in sectors, out of the Filipino billionaires in the Forbes list, 12 are in real estate. There's something wrong there. Real estate and services just won't create the kind of jobs we need. And also, I think I was in a forum with Undersecretary Fit Aldaba recently. They had a very good plan for a national innovation strategy. And that cuts to the heart of the matter. If we're not developing Filipino science and technology, if we're not building the capacity for innovation, that cutting edge of economic development won't really be happening. And one thing we raised there, it's not enough to have innovative foreign firms in the Philippines. We have to have innovative Filipino firms as well.
I saw in your presentation, there's a table somewhere there that you're advocating for a stimulus package of how much? I think that's
about 1.3 to 1.5 trillion.
Trillion, right? But you mentioned that when we increase the tax like 2.5% to certain portion of the rich, it only amounts to a little bit about 150 billion or 200 billion. I'm not sure with your figure. But where do we get the others?
I think a combination. We can monetize part of the deficit. We can borrow part of it. And I think a core source of revenues is a quickly recovering economy. The faster economy recovers, the more revenues will be generating as well. So I don't think there's a single source for the money we need. But if we're so conservative and we're not spending, we're actually straitjacketing ourselves and perhaps not creating the conditions for further revenue generation in the future. That's why, it's so hard to just look for one source. Clearly, we can borrow too much, but also we're maybe not borrowing enough. I don't know. I mean, I think these are things that we have to keep balancing. And if it's borrowing for more rapid economic growth, more broad-based economic growth in the next 3 to 5 years, actually, theoretically, that should be start paying for itself.
Yes. I saw your green and red chart. Where local investment, you'll grow this much, and with foreign direct investment, it's only this much. Does that mean when there's foreign direct investment, there's no more local investment that is going to happen, or there will be less local investment that's going to happen?
Our view is we have to treat foreign investment as a means of development, not as an end to development. Mm-hmm. And two parables for us is what happened with Hanjin and Intel. Intel was around for 30 years, invested over $1.5 billion, was exporting $500-600 million here in terms of electronics exports. But when they left, we actually had no electronics industry to speak of. Hanjin, the same thing. We boasted being one of the world's great shipbuilders. But when Hanjin packed up, well, we actually didn't have any downstream steel industries or the like. So but foreign investment should have a role. Yes. But I think just giving all the incentives of foreign investment without actually getting long-term benefits in return, that actually might be problematic.
So you do agree that foreign investment might also somehow help, but it's not the main...
Definitely, we're always misinterpreted to be we want to close off the economy. But again, looking back on the long economic history of all developed countries, foreign investment generally had a key role. And the question is making sure there are long-term benefits from that investment. And I think Hanjin and Intel are great examples because Hanjin and Intel left. What do we have? We're still making bancas and we're relying on CDR King and cheap Chinese electronic goods.
Okay, thank you so much, Director Sunny of Iwan Foundation. Now, let me go to our reactors. First, I would like to call on Mr. George Barcelon of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Sir, your reaction, please.
Well, thank you very much, Attorney Dindo and Mr. Sunny Africa for a very enlightening talk. Of course, we on the ground, we have visibility of what's happening. And definitely regarding the COVID pandemic, it has created a lot of havoc to our economy. Prior to that, we're doing quite well. The employment rate was down. Our growth rate was quite acceptable among the ASEAN countries. But having said that, because both of you touched on many areas, I just like to sum it up because I'm only given 5 minutes. Okay. The focus now, of course, is in the economy. Okay, definitely. We're down by, I think, by the end of the year, we should be down closer to a high, probably about 9%. But the thing is, it's the suffering is really on the marginalized, okay, the workers, and we realize that. So, but since we're talking about how to have our economy move forward. I talked a bit on the long term, which touches on some of the issues that you brought upon. Well, first, we have to admit that we are in a global community, okay? We don't exist alone. Works, services, product has a certain value that must be competitive, okay? So that's a fact. So having said that, I think areas that that the government should put more effort, I do agree, we should put our resources where it's really needed, like education for one. Okay, we have now shifted to K-12, but I think we still have to beef up our basic education. Government has increased the salary of teachers, but again, increasing the salary doesn't mean automatically increasing their teaching ability. So there's a concern in that area. Okay, and the other side on the education is the nutrition of our young. Okay, we are lacking on that, and there are many high percentage of our young that are stunted, and those are human resources. Although we pride ourselves in the Philippines that demographically we are the sweet spot because our population age is just averaging 24 and quite balanced between male and female. So education is definitely not only from the academic side but also from the worker side. The skill sets upgrading, re-education, and value formation. All of this is just as important as we are facing the world, globally. Now, all of this touches on the employment, and I do agree what was pointed out, I think, by Sani, or was it the long-term industrial development? We need that because we need to focus where we have or we put in effort to develop our human resources. Why does Filipino get more outside? Because their skill is valued. Here locally, because of the supply and demand, and because of if we just focus on the sectors that we are doing now, then that's the amount of pay that we can afford. So we really have to upskill our workers to attract foreign investment. This goes hand in hand. And I have many occasions mentioned to Secretary Mon Lopez that we should incentivize training of different sectors. Okay, sometimes we use a broad brushstroke and say foreign investment. Let's be more focused. What are the sectors we want to come to attract? Okay, and sometimes they do have concern about our skills, capability. So why don't we incentivize they coming first and train the workers? We have CCT, cash constitution, cash transfer. Maybe part of that can be used for the training. Okay, once they get certified, as a businessman personally, I don't really, in doing business, the low wage that we have, it's really a disincentive. But then you have to reflect that on the skills that they have. I would rather have people that we invest, that we train, and give them a higher salary, and that should be the formula. I know there's always this, as mentioned earlier by Attorney Dindo, that there seems to be an adversarial relationship between management and the labor sectors. Okay, and this is one area that again, it's also starts with E. We need an ecology. We need to be an ecology wherein the three legs of the economy works together: the employer, the employee, and the government. And that comes into play that it's very important that the ease of doing business in the Philippines must be looked into. Some laws has to be tweaked, whether there are laws pending now, foreign investment, and also the labor law must be tweaked also. Definitely, I have been in business for quite a number of years. I do have generally my feeling is that, if we have a work plan wherein we take the laborers as partners because we want to invest in them. I know there was a lot of concern about, sometimes workers are being let go. But honestly speaking, if we invest so much in giving their skill, it would be at our loss to let them go. Only for those who are not productive, only for those who are not carrying their wage, that we need labor laws to protect the employers also, to let them go. Because in this world, there's no such thing as entitlement, perpetual entitlement. So that's something that that can be looked into. The other side is the encouraging the entrepreneurship. Okay, and a lot has been said by both the speakers. Basically, we need an enablement. We need financial support. It has been shared with us on the various stimulus plan, and I think that's important. Government is encouraging balik probinsya, and we have been PCCI has been encouraging that for the longest time. Even when I was president of PCCI, I kept on saying, agriculture must be really focused. Okay, first, that helps us in our food sufficiency, and the other side is that we can export our produce. Okay, if the data shows that we are importing twice what we export, while other countries are exporting twice what they import. So again, these are things that must be looked at, and we should encourage the young to look at agriculture not as a low tech, but as a high tech. You are talking about Internet of Things. You're talking about targeted fertilization, targeted irrigation, and that's the only way we can be competitive. And of course, we have to tweak our laws also on the carp. I don't want to go into that. It's too much detail, and I'm not an expert in that area. The other area that I would like to touch on is that the foreign investment that we're trying to talk about quite often is that businessmen are businessmen. They would look for an area wherein the laws are applied as what is written, and there is a fairness in treating their investment, and they can see the human resource that's here. And those are the conditions. Now we have a lot of Taiwanese company in the clotheswear, in the bags and everything. They're investing quite a lot in the north, and I'm sure there are other sectors that we should attract further. There are laws that on the agriculture side that is being talked about by the Foundation of Economic Freedom. I've touched base with Tote Chinkiamko about the condonation of agri-loans, and then also the agri-free patent. Those are the pieces that needs to be worked out to encourage our give more stimulus to our agri sectors. And lastly, I know I don't have that much time. The other E that I want to mention is our E is the exchange rate. Okay, I think our peso is too strong. We appreciate it relatively faster than the other ASEAN countries. Of course, basically, the reason now is that the importations less because of our demands. But this can be looked into, wherein it helps the economy, knowing that our remittance for OFW remittance is in the range of 30 billion, and 1 peso's difference is 30 billion to the economy, and also for us to be more competitive in the export sector. So I know there are a lot of issues that both gentlemen touched on, and they're very enlightening. One parting words I'd like to share with the panel and our viewers is that during this time of pandemic, you can see where the role of the private sectors and businessmen comes in. The government is quite financially strapped with giving SAP, Social Amortization Program, and also AYUDA. Now, a lot really came from the private sectors, extending financial assistance to their employees. Many of the firms gave COVID leaves on their own. Some are giving us more as far as 12 to 18 days, and then also extending the 13-month ahead of time. And I just like to give the impression that it shouldn't be adversarial. We should work together, And you can see during this pandemic, the business sector has really stepped up to the plate. And they have really, in a way, extend necessary aid to their workers or to the employees. With that, I'll end my wrap-up. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you so much, Mr. George Barcelon. I would like to ask you a question because our speakers today presented their proposal. One presented opening up to foreign direct investors.
Yes.
I think will encourage more competition to local businesses, which
No.
we are part of. And our other speaker now, is suggesting some additional taxes, to which I'm sure many members of the PCCI will also be affected. So my question is, which would you be more afraid of? More taxes or foreign direct investors?
We're not afraid of foreign direct investments, really, because I think that on a whole, that create more jobs and help the economy. Okay. Recently, with the tariff issues between China and the U.S., we're really trying to work our best to attract investments to come to the Philippines. A lot of investment in China are from within the ASEAN region, from Singapore, from East Asia, Taiwan, and the likes. And they are shifting. But honestly speaking, most of them are shifting to Vietnam.
Okay.
But we're working hard on our way in a way that every time we get the chance to have a forum with them, I try to arrange meetings with the Singaporean Business Federation with Secretary Sani Dominguez, okay, to really show them that Philippines is open for business. But I tell you, it's not only the private sector, it has to be the whole, perception of the country. That's why we have ARTA, which is also related to ease of doing business, and that's important. Now, as far as the wealth tax and everything, this is my personal feeling. I cannot say for sure for the other. I cannot say on behalf of the other businessmen. You have to ask questions, okay? Our GAA every year is going up, okay? We have to tax, even for all this stimulus fund. It has to come from somewhere, okay? But the point is, how there must be prudence and accountability in the money being spent.
Okay.
So that is the foremost.
So you mean good governance?
Good governance, yes.
All right.
That's very important. So, if this is made aware to the private sectors, and for the whole, it's good when you have the infrastructure and everything. So we're seeing our country move forward. By the way, I also represent ASEAN back, as mentioned earlier in the introduction.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I see how far we're behind.
Yeah.
And sometimes it pains me to think that we could do better. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. George Barcelon, for your insight. Now, let me go to Dr. Martin Henkelmann, the German Philippine Chamber of Commerce. Sir, may we have your reaction, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, really, thank you very much for having me as part of this distinguished panel, and thank you very much to the speaker. It's a particularly big honor, a large honor for me to speak after George Barcelon. It's really great. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I would emphasize that I as a lawyer, it's very interesting for me to see the discussion about the Constitution and linking the question about the Constitution to the economic questions. Because when I was in law school, a long time ago, this was about the time when the nice photo you put up for me in the beginning, this is about the time probably when I was in law school. At this time, we were just looking on the constitutions of the new states which were joining Germany after reunification, and we were discussing exactly these questions: states or regions coming out of a socialist or communist regime, how they would be integrated in our constitutional law, which had been quite positive for the economic development in Germany. So it's a very interesting question. And of course, having followed the debate in Europe afterwards, always reforming the treaties, which we always call treaty, and we wouldn't say a constitution. We always discussed as well, the European Union originally was very much driven by economic questions, and then a whole lot of other layers came in there, and etc. So we always see this challenge to balance this. And when I share a couple of ideas here today, and thanks again for letting me doing this, it's really my personal view as as a lawyer and an interested person in the debate, and perhaps a little bit less what the German chamber would say about this, as they would more focus on the day-to-day business. However, of course, my experience go into this, and then let me start perhaps by looking on the constitutional question first, and let me make a quick couple of points there. The first thing which was really interesting for me to see is this strong, very strict provision here on not allowing people to be re-elected. This is something coming from Germany, where our current chancellor has been re-elected 4 times. And the long-time Chancellor Helmut Kohl had been re-elected 3 times, so 4 terms, 4 years. It's quite interesting. And just one anecdote is that the president of the parliament itself is now in the parliament for 48 years and decided to run again to be elected. So quite different rule here, very interesting. And of course, after 2 years in the country, I do understand reasons behind it, but it's a point which is quite interesting. When we look on the constitutional question, I would point out it's, I think, very important for investment is the question of stability in the legal system. Stability, security, transparency. We all from the law school know pacta sunt servanda, although it's not a private law, saying it comes from the public law more, but it's an interesting point, I think, very important. So whatever we kind of work with the Constitution and whatever we do with the Constitution when we want to attract investment and want to initiate economic freedom, it's important to have this in mind. So we need a kind of a strong legal system which ensures this. Might this be through strong rights from the companies or for the persons, the individual? Might this through a good system? Very important point. A second point, which I think is very decisive, is which I've seen also because I did part of my law studies in France, that the system is a little bit different. And when I started my job in Tunisia, Northern Africa, they had just set up a constitution after the Arab Spring, which was strongly influenced by the French. And there is this question, do you have a constitution and a legal system that has the approach to say everything is allowed if it is not prohibited? So you have this freedom of people to act, and only the state comes in there and says this is a business activity which is not allowed. Or do you see it the other way around? You say, we are kind of the guys here at the gate as government, and we say nothing is allowed if you don't open the gate here, and I as government decide. And I think, which I think is very positive here, I see that the Philippines are more on the side of saying many things are allowed if it is not prohibited. And prohibited is because things are dangerous or against competition, etc. I think this is a very important point to have in mind when you decide which way you go for a constitution. And in this connection also, when you look on the rights you give to companies, to individuals, do we speak about the right of the individual? How much do you entitle an individual to have rights, a demand something against the government? Does he have a right to say, I have the right to get labor organized by the government? Or do I say I have a social state or some social welfare state? And if someone doesn't find a labor and cannot pay his own living, we as a government intervene in this case and are kind of the buffer that kicks in at this moment. I think this is very important as well to see, because we have seen, and if you look around in the world, you see different constitutional traditions. Do you give people the right to claim something against the government? Let's say about, do I have the right to say I have the right to have clean environment? Or do I say, no, you have the right to say that the government has to protect your health, and out of this you might get the right as well to ask for clean environment and ask the government to establish law that helps to protect the environment. Very important point for me, there's this as well. Fourth point, foreign investment. Foreign investment, I think, is a point which was tackled here already quite intensively. I personally think, from my experience, that it is important that we accept two facts. One is that we are in a globalized world, and the second one, that the government, the country, has the right to decide which kind of investment it wants. This is a political decision. But as it is a political decision, I think we shouldn't have restrictions written in the constitutional law, because it's a political decision and it might change. So to have this rather in normal laws and not in the constitutional law makes it much more flexible. I've seen situations in countries where people said, so all natural resources have to be exploited 100% by companies. And then the discussion started, what do you do with the solar energy? Is this a natural resource? And they even blocked the solar energy, saying no foreign investment in this area. I mean, this kind of gives it a little bit too absurd, but I just want to show you, and you have to have this flexibility. And I think Attorney Dindo mentioned how the Americans do this, and I think this is the approach we see very often as well in European countries. Let me quickly point out to the question of federalism, which is for me as a German with a strong federalism approach very, very much at heart. But I must admit, I cannot say in the Philippines I would not give a recommendation. I couldn't do this, I must really say. I do have much of sympathy for having strong regions as they're closer to the decision there. But on the other side, and of course, you probably on the other side you can save money if you have less layers, and of course you also have the possibility to kind of govern more top down, and sometimes it helps, for example, in a pandemic. Although we will see after the pandemic if it really is much better to have this top down approach, or if countries didn't do better that have a strong federalism. But I must admit, on the other side, you need strong administrative powers and knowledge, skilled persons on this level to do good decision. Let me quickly add 2 points with regard to the stimulus package and the question of what we can do without the constitution at the moment. One thing I think was intensively discussed, stimulus package. We did a survey as chamber, and we found out that many companies think that it is quite necessary to do a little bit more of a stimulus package for the industry. The macroeconomic parameters of the Philippines are quite strong. So the question is really, why not investing a little bit more there? I do understand that one of the arguments is the crisis might last longer, so we need to kind of keep some power in the garage that we can use it later. However, I think looking at the moment, at the situation, we also have to be aware that if it is a marathon at the moment, if you start to run too late for the marathon or to accelerate, you might not come in strong in the end. So difficult question. I think perhaps a little bit more could be good. I think if you look on short, quick measures, I think also that passing the CREATE law would be very good. Lowering the income tax, the corporate income tax from 30 to 25 will help. It will mobilize investment and probably also incentivize that more people or companies that are here trying to, perhaps with 30%, they rather try to evade paying taxes. It might be interesting then with 25 or even with 20, the willingness to pay this rate might be larger. And we shouldn't forget that when we look on the incentives at the moment, particularly for foreign investment, it's not a question what we missed because we didn't ask them to pay the full tax rate in the past. It's more what we got because we offered them the opportunity. Because much of the foreign investment wouldn't have gone to the Philippines if they hadn't gotten interesting incentives. Companies come and they are willing also to pay higher tax if other parameters are interesting. However, being an archipelago, being a little bit off the Asian continent, having a not so strong infrastructure are factors that play against the Philippines. So you kind of have to balance this to make it an interesting investment plan for a company to come to the Philippines, and then you can even push up more the USP you have, very good skilled workers, and also the language advantage. Point red tape, it was mentioned, red tape can mobilize a whole lot of investment. There, I think many things are on the way. It's great that we have ARTA now. We have been in exchange with them. I think very good points on track there. And when we ask how to mobilize investment, cutting red tape is one of the big things. We got a survey in Germany, and the German companies that told in the pandemic, they said cutting red tape will help. And our survey here in the Philippines was the same. They said one of the big things to help in the pandemics, cutting red tape. And with this, I would leave it for the moment. Thank you.
Yes, we're a bit running out of time. So may I turn to Dr. Bernie Villegas now? Sir, could you offer your reaction, please? Dr. Bernie.
Well, I just build on many of the positive things already mentioned by the former speakers. The first thing I'd like to emphasize is what Sunny mentioned, we cannot get back just to business as usual. So the most important reform, I think George and others agree, is in the area of agriculture. 75% of the poor in this country are in rural areas. Most of them are involved in agriculture. So coconut farmers among the poorest of the poor, landless farmers who have to do a lot of slashing and burning, assistant fishermen. And that is why the most important change we have to see after the pandemic is to have all sectors, government, private sector, and civil society really focusing on how to improve agricultural productivity in this country. Really stick out like a sore thumb compared to our peers, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia. And this is one area where we have to look at how we can make investment in natural resources, as Martin mentioned, Dr. Martin, more flexible. We should not have things so straitjacketed in our constitution. For example, we made a terrible mistake in not supporting our agrarian reform program with the resources that the small farmers needed to be more productive. We gave them 1 to 2 hectares, then we abandoned them, and they became poorer than before. They had land, but nothing else. Now, there's a great need to see how we can consolidate a lot of the small farms without taking away ownership from them, but precisely getting models from other countries like Malaysia, where the nucleus estate system worked beautifully for palm oil. And I'm sure there are other systems, whether it's corporatives, as mentioned by Land Bank, or cooperatives, but we have to do something about the fragmentation that was not supported by farm-to-market roads, irrigation systems, and all the services that the farmers needed. So that's an area I would like really everyone to focus on. I just like to make a correction. I was just with the Consunhi group, and Sunny, the Consunhis are very exposed to agriculture. You showed in that chart that the Consunhis are not in agriculture. They are in palm oil, they're in rubber, they're very much involved in Mindanao. I'd like to see a lot more conglomerates, precisely. Sunny is right. Most of the other big businesses are in services or in manufacturing, especially in food manufacturing. Incidentally, I am a realist. I don't think we can compete in the area of export orientation of manufacturing with our neighbors. We lost the bus, so to speak, in the last century. We focused so much on inward-looking industrialization that we lost the advantage of, at that time, of our still lower cost of labor. Now our wages are among the highest in Southeast Asia. And not to mention the reasons why, as Sunny mentioned, Intel moved to Vietnam. We still have a lot of obstacles to investing here. I don't think we can really become a major export oriented economy in manufacturing. If our manufacturing sector will thrive, it will be because of our 110 million population, which will increase about 150 million in the next 20 years, getting more income. We can have a lot of industries, yes, but based on selling to the domestic market. Now, it's in agriculture where we can realistically plan to export more and more than just bananas and pineapples. If we now look at ways of refocusing a lot of our land towards high-value crops, whether it be cacao, coffee, many of the things that our neighbors did, which we did not do because we were so focused on rice self-sufficiency. I know it's a very big debate, and I fully agree that we should not target self-sufficiency. We don't have the competitive advantage that Thailand and Vietnam have, that have rivers that are like oceans. We should have done what Malaysia did more than 20 years ago, when Malaysia defined self-sufficiency in rice at 60%, and they just said, let's import from our neighbors, Thailand and Vietnam. And let's now use our land in high-value crops like palm oil, like rubber. Then we use our earnings from these high-value crops to import rice. I think that should have been our decision 20 years ago. But for political reasons, all of our former leaders for wanted right self-sufficiency. Those are some of the reforms I would like to see in agriculture. Then we should really be more open to foreigners. Like, for example, if you want to get the nucleus estate model that was so successful in Malaysia for palm oil, we should invite Malaysians to team up with us so they can transfer their experiences not only in palm oil, but in other crops which can be approached using nucleus estate, where you have a large corporation like Sime Darby, Godfrey, teaming up with thousands of small holders, helping them to plant whatever high value crop can succeed in export. I emphasize this because the biggest challenge to countries like China and our Northeast Asian neighbors is food security. Everyone is afraid that they will not be able to feed themselves. And here we have Southeast Asia as the food basket for the Asia Pacific region. And that is why that is an area which we will kill two birds with one stone. If we focus on agricultural development, we also address poverty, because most of our poor people are in the rural areas. Then the other thing I'd just like to say from the standpoint of realism is I agree with Sunny that sometimes it doesn't make sense that we have 10 million people abroad. But that is a fact we have to contend with. We made so many mistakes in the past that we did not create enough employment opportunities. So the excess labor that is so much in demand abroad, because most countries that are developed are now suffering from demographic suicide. Right now as we speak, I know of groups sending Germans here to teach nurses and other workers in the health sector German, so they can actually go to Germany or to Switzerland or to Austria. I know of groups training also health workers how to speak Japanese so they can go to Japan, because all of these countries know that once they return to normal, they are going to have a tremendous need for Filipino professionals. They identify Filipinos because we have a tremendous advantage over other workers in terms of our soft skills. So that is a reality. Overseas workers will continue to support about 10% of our GDP. I know it is not the ideal situation, but we have to accept reality. The same thing we can say about our supporting the BPO IT sectors of many developed countries who will continue to outsource business services to the Philippines. And I agree that with George that we have to do something to continue upgrading our educational system so that we will move away from call centers that are the easiest to robotize. Artificial intelligence will make call centers obsolete in the future. But what we have to do is move up these workers towards knowledge process outsourcing. Work which requires more critical thinking skills, more effective communication skills, and the ability to interrelate sciences, which would require better and better university education. So let me stop there and get others.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bernie Villegas, for your wonderful insight. Let me ask you one small point. Do you believe that agriculture could be helped or hampered by foreign direct investments?
It can be helped, really. For example, Kennymer has taken over 2,000 hectares in Palawan so that we can graduate also to cacao exports and not only bananas and pineapples. No? And there are many other high-value crops in which foreigners can help us with their technology and their capital, and so we have to be ready. But I'm not saying that we should now confiscate those small land. As I said, let's look for models which can make it possible to consolidate, but at the same time, have the farmers participate.
You agreed with Mr. Barcelon regarding education. Let me ask again, will education
Definitely
be hampered or deterred by FDI or helped by the FDIs? Or no effect?
Oh, it can be helped. It can be definitely helped. If we have, the top business schools, for example, in Europe, I'm sure Sir Martin Hagen knows that, Yes, INSEAD, IMD, and so on and so forth, looking at the Philippines. because of our ability to speak English as a center for management and other education in Asia, why don't we allow them to come here and partner with AIM, with Ateneo, etc., etc.
Okay.
So yes, we're so close to investment in education and media. Those are the two sectors I would like to open up.
Okay. All right. Now, I would like to give our speakers the time to respond. Who would like to respond first? Attorney or Mr. Sani? Mr. Sani, would you like to respond to our reactors?
Yeah. You know, there's so much to agree with our reactors. I particularly like, in terms of case Sir George Barcelon, that question about high wages and low wages. It's all about pay higher wages for higher productivity. So I think that's one worrying thing about the COVID response of the government. There hasn't been enough support for education. We're so disrupted. We're going to create a divide now between those who were able to adjust better to the COVID situation and the bigger mass who weren't. So I think that's a stumbling block for us in terms of this need to really improve our human capital so that they get the wages they deserve. I think I really want to latch onto that.
The other point of
Dr. Martin, I think the stability was important. And I do agree, these are political decisions, but what we are quite actually keen on, it is a challenge, as Dr. Bernie said, how do we develop our industry in a world of very intense competitiveness with China, doing all the cheap labor stuff. But the thing is, I think it's unavoidable. We're the 12th, 13th largest country in the world. We do have natural resources. I know it's a challenge, but I think we're in the cusp of something of further economic decline. And one thing I want to highlight, the last really breakout industrial economies really were just, I think, South Korea, Taiwan, the next from the 60s and 70s. I think it's very alarming and a sign of the challenge. In the last 30, 40 years, we haven't seen that kind of breakout industrial economy yet. So I'm not saying it's easy, but there is importance. We still do believe in pursuing industrial development on the basis of, to Dr. Bernie Villegas, so agree with Philippine agriculture. It's so depressing when you see horse, Carabao drawn plows. I mean, these are technologies from Mesopotamia in 3000 BC. So to be seeing that in the Philippines today, and to see small plots of land not even having Carabaos, I think that's a sign of this huge neglect for agriculture. And one of our main lobby points is it doesn't make sense to allot just 3 to 4% of your national budget to agriculture, which is the way it has been going on for decades, and even with the 2021 budget. If we don't develop agriculture, that is really the first step to, I think, national development. And I so agree that it has to be given much, much more attention as a foundation for, other modernizations we need in the rest of the economy. Thank you.
All right. Attorney Dindo, how would you like to respond as well?
Thank you. For the presentation of Mr. Sani, Africa, yes, I agree. Ideally we should have a locally led industrialization. That's ideal. I think Japan and Korea did that. But just in case there are no takers, since we lack investors in that field, I hope we will also be open to other players, especially the FDI. Now for Mr. Barcelon, sir, I used to be a labor lawyer. I still do, but now I'm into corporate commercial law. And there is a way where labor and management can cooperate. It's not always the collective bargaining, push and pull, etc. When it comes to growing the economy, opening the economy, increasing the value of the economy, I think that's where labor and management can work together to push for law reforms. Yun lang po. And then for Dr. Henkelman, thank you for pointing out your view that it's best that restrictions should not be in the Constitution. That's also our position. We're not saying it should be open 100%. In fact, in the bill we have, there's a safeguard there. What I'm saying is we open it now, Congress is there anyway to put limits later in case there is a problem. And for Dr. Villegas, thank you for pointing out that FDI is very much welcome in agriculture, education, yes sir, and also in mass media. I understand that there are like foreign, I don't know what you call that, foreign business campuses of the big universities situated overseas. So I hope we have something like that. But in order to do that, we have to change the constitution first. Yun lang po. Salamat.
All right. Thank you so much, Attorney Dindo Donato. So, unfortunately, I would like to read some questions, but unfortunately, we don't have time. That's all the time that we have for now. So that's all we have. I think one afternoon is not enough to answer all the questions that we may have about amending the constitution or improving the economy, and that's all. And that's even just for the economic provisions alone. So definitely, this is not the end. Tanggulan Demokrasya, in partnership with Publicus Asia, will be producing more webinars like this in a month or maybe in a few weeks' time, I'm sure. Well, watch out for our announcement on Facebook for that. At this point, I would like to thank our speakers, Attorney Dindo Donato, thank you so much. Even Foundation Director, Sunny Africa, thank you. I would also like to thank our panelists, Dr. George Barcelon of the PCCI, Dr. Martin Henkelmann of German-Philippine Chamber of Commerce, and Dr. Bernie Villegas for their wonderful insights for gracing this event. Of course, I would like to thank Tanggulan Demokrasya for this presentation and the management and the technical staff of Publicus who made this event possible. And finally, thank you to all our audience. I'm sorry I was not able to read all your comments, or not even one of your comments. I'm sure you would all like to see our country rise from this pandemic and from our economic doldrums. I hope you join us again on our next events, which we will announce on Facebook. Again, my name is Arnel Andrenal. Thank you, everyone, and have a very good afternoon. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Salamat.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. Salamat. Bye-bye.